Imagine a place where everyone knows your name, a town so peaceful, so perfect, you'd think nothing could ever go wrong. Pine Hill, a quiet, picturesque suburban enclave, but beneath that polished surface, a darkness brewed, a darkness so profound it would shatter lives, friendships, and trust, all born from a secret no one dared speak, a secret that led to obsession, betrayal, and eventually murder. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Jennifer Johnson, whose life was brutally cut short, and the seemingly idyllic lives of two couples whose intertwined desires led to an unimaginable end. In Pine Hill, two couples shone brightest. Daniel and Linda Garner, the epitome of stability and success. Daniel, a respected architect, charming with a seemingly perfect marriage. Linda, his wife, a dedicated schoolteacher, beloved by all. Their home on Maple Street was a picture of suburban bliss, a well-tended garden, a symbol of their perfect life. Then there were Mark and Jennifer Johnson. They moved to Pine Hill 5 years ago and quickly became the Garners' closest friends. Mark, a successful financial advisor, outgoing, the life of every party, and Jennifer, with her striking beauty and magnetic personality. She was equally popular. Their friendship blossomed over shared interests, mutual respect. They were more than just neighbors, they were family, woven into the very fabric of Pine Hill, but a perfect facade can hide a dangerous crack. It started innocently enough, or so they thought. One dinner party at the Garners' home, fueled by wine and a sense of adventure. The conversation drifted, as it sometimes does, to open relationships. To everyone's surprise, the concept wasn't met with shock, but curiosity. Over the next few weeks, they discussed it more seriously, setting boundaries, rules to protect their primary relationships. They all agreed what could go wrong if everyone was on the same page. The first encounter was awkward, yet exhilarating. Daniel with Jennifer, Mark with Linda, partners exchanged for the night. It was thrilling, nerve-wracking, leaving them eager for more. What began as a once-in-a-while experiment soon became a regular part of their lives, injecting a spark into both marriages. For a while, it seemed to work perfectly. Both couples appeared happier, more connected. They maintained their social activities, hosted joint parties, went on vacations together. Their secret was guarded, discussed only in private. The novelty, the exhilaration, and they believed they had found the perfect balance, but the balance was fragile. As the months passed, subtle changes began to surface, particularly in Daniel's behavior. He started to show an unusual amount of interest in Jennifer, finding reasons to spend time alone with her. Linda, his wife, noticed. She chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. Mark, Jennifer's husband, seemed completely oblivious to the growing tension. They had no idea what was brewing beneath the surface. No idea that Daniel's fascination was morphing into something deeper, something far more troubling. Daniel found himself thinking about Jennifer constantly, replaying their encounters in his mind, craving more time. What had started as a harmless adventure was slowly, terrifyingly, morphing into an obsession. His architectural projects, once his passion, now seemed secondary to his overwhelming desire for Jennifer. He started finding ways to be near her, volunteering for tasks Mark usually handled, inviting the Johnsons over more frequently. Linda saw the change. At first, she dismissed it as the excitement of their new lifestyle, but soon it became chillingly clear. Daniel's interest in Jennifer went far beyond their agreement. He became irritable, distant when they weren't with the Johnsons. His conversations constantly veered towards Jennifer, her likes, her dislikes, her quirks, her habits. One evening after a dinner party, Linda finally confronted him. His reaction? Defensive. He dismissed her concerns as mere jealousy. Linda, desperate not to disrupt their delicate arrangement, let it go. But she watched him more closely. Her suspicions grew when she caught him staring at Jennifer, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. Jennifer, too, began to sense Daniel's growing obsession. Initially, she might have been flattered by his attention, but soon it became uncomfortable. His touches grew more possessive, his words more intimate than appropriate. She confided in Mark, her husband, but he brushed it off, believing Daniel was simply more expressive in his affections. Mark's nonchalance left Jennifer feeling utterly isolated in her growing fear. The turning point. A weekend trip to a lakeside cabin. The couples planned it to reconnect, to escape routine. But the trip only amplified Daniel's fixation. He monopolized Jennifer's time, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone, leaving Mark and Linda behind. The tension was palpable. Jennifer tried to distance herself, but Daniel's subtle resistance was always there. Then, one night sitting by the fire, Daniel made a comment that crossed every line. He spoke about leaving everything behind, starting fresh, just the two of them. Jennifer was shocked, unsettled. She excused herself, went to bed early. Linda, who had overheard every word, confronted Daniel again. This time he was less dismissive, but he still refused to acknowledge the depth of his feelings. Linda's frustration morphed into a desperate dread. She loved her husband, but she was increasingly aware that his infatuation with Jennifer could destroy everything: their marriage, their friendship with the Johnsons, their very lives. Despite her efforts to intervene, Daniel's behavior only became more erratic. He started to follow Jennifer outside of their arranged meetings, showing up at her yoga classes, even appearing at her workplace under the guise of casual visits. Jennifer's unease spiraled into pure fear. She confided in a close friend, who advised her, get as much distance from Daniel as possible. Determined to regain control, Jennifer made a decision. She would end the arrangement completely. She hoped that by doing so, Daniel would return to his senses and they could all move on from this nightmare without further harm. One evening, Mark was away on a business trip. Daniel showed up at the Johnsons' house, unannounced. Jennifer was taken aback, but she let him in, desperate to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Daniel confessed his feelings, speaking of a future where they could be together openly. Jennifer was horrified. She tried to reason with him, explaining their arrangement was never meant to be more than temporary excitement, but Daniel's declarations became more intense. Jennifer's fear turned to a cold, hard anger. She knew she had to end this now, before it destroyed her marriage and her friendship with Linda. She told Daniel firmly that their arrangement was over. He needed to respect her boundaries, her marriage. Daniel was visibly shaken. He tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Jennifer stood her ground. For the next few days, Jennifer avoided Daniel, hoping he'd come to his senses. She confided in Linda, who listened with a heavy heart. Linda knew her husband's obsession had gone too far, and while she wanted to support Jennifer, a twisted loyalty to Daniel held her. She promised Jennifer she'd talk to him, hoping to defuse the situation. But Daniel's obsession only deepened. He started showing up at Jennifer's work, waiting for her after hours, leaving messages expressing his undying love. Jennifer, feeling increasingly unsafe, decided to confront him one last time. She had to make him understand the gravity of his actions. They met at a secluded park, away from prying eyes. Jennifer reiterated their arrangement was over. His behavior was unacceptable. She pleaded with him to let go, to move on. Daniel, unable to accept her rejection, grew desperate. He accused her of leading him on, of playing with his emotions. Jennifer, maintaining her composure, insisted they part ways, return to their respective marriages. What they didn't know, Linda had followed Daniel to the park. She watched from a distance, her heart pounding as the confrontation unfolded. She saw the anguish on Daniel's face, the determination on Jennifer's. Linda knew this was inevitable, but she also feared what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Daniel's desperation twisted into pure rage. Jennifer's refusal felt like a personal betrayal. He lashed out verbally, calling her names, accusing her of ruining his life. Jennifer, holding back tears, stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Linda, watching from the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to intervene before things spiraled out of control. She stepped out, her voice shaking, calling out to Daniel. The sight of Linda seemed to snap Daniel out of his rage. He turned to her, his expression a chaotic mix of confusion and relief. Jennifer, seizing the moment, walked away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Daniel as possible. Linda, now alone with her husband, tried to calm him. She reassured him they would find a way to move past this, but inside, she knew their lives had been irreversibly changed. The affair had reached its breaking point, and Jennifer's decision to end the arrangement had set off a chain of events that could not be undone. The confrontation at the park left Daniel in a state of turmoil. Jennifer's firm rejection, Linda's unexpected appearance, had shaken him to his core. He returned home that night, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and despair. Linda tried to soothe him, but Daniel remained inconsolable. Over the next few days, Daniel's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He vacillated between bouts of intense anger and deep despondency. He stopped going to work, spending his days obsessing over Jennifer's rejection and the perceived injustices he had suffered. Linda, unable to reach him, felt her own frustration and fear escalating. She knew something had to give, but she wasn't prepared for the drastic turn events would soon take. Jennifer, on the other hand, was desperate to move forward. She avoided all contact with Daniel, focusing on her work and her relationship with Mark. She hadn't told her husband the full extent of Daniel's terrifying obsession, fearing his reaction and the potential fallout. She hoped that by cutting ties, Daniel would eventually come to terms with the end and leave her alone. One evening, Jennifer returned home from work. Her heart sank. Daniel was waiting for her outside her house. She steeled herself for another confrontation. She approached him cautiously, her voice steady but firm as she told him to leave. Daniel, his eyes wild with desperation, begged her for one last chance, one last explanation. Jennifer, sensing the futility, tried to walk past him, but Daniel grabbed her arm. His grip was tight, painful. Jennifer saw the madness in his eyes. She struggled to break free, her voice rising as she demanded he let go. The commotion attracted a neighbor, who stepped outside to see what was happening. Seeing the neighbor, Daniel released Jennifer and fled. Jennifer, shaken and frightened, thanked the neighbor and hurried inside. She called Linda, praying they could resolve this without involving the police. Linda, hearing the raw fear in Jennifer's voice, agreed to meet the next day to discuss Daniel's increasingly unstable behavior. The next day, Linda met Jennifer at a local cafe. Jennifer, looking exhausted and tense, recounted the terrifying encounter with Daniel, her growing fear for her safety. Linda listened intently, her mind racing, trying to formulate a plan. She promised Jennifer that she would talk to Daniel, make him understand that their relationship was over for good. After the meeting, Linda returned home to find Daniel in a state of agitation. She confronted him about the incident with Jennifer, her voice a mix of anger and concern. Daniel, feeling cornered, lashed out at her, accusing her of taking Jennifer's side, of betraying him. The argument escalated. Linda, fearing for her own safety, retreated to their bedroom. That night, Daniel's thoughts turned darker. He couldn't accept that Jennifer had rejected him, or that his own wife was against him. In his twisted mind, he believed there was only one way to resolve the situation: eliminate the source of his pain. If he couldn't have Jennifer, no one could. On a cold, clear night, Daniel made his way to the Johnsons' house. He knew Mark was out of town, leaving Jennifer alone. He broke in through a side window and made his way to the bedroom where Jennifer lay sleeping. The sight of her, peaceful and unaware, fueled his rage and desperation. He grabbed a kitchen knife. He approached her, his mind a chaotic haze of twisted love and burning hatred. Jennifer awoke to the sight of Daniel standing over her, the knife gleaming in the dim light. She tried to scream, but Daniel covered her mouth, his grip strong, unyielding. In a fit of unspeakable rage, he plunged the knife into her chest, silencing her cries. As Jennifer's life slipped away, Daniel stood over her, his mind a terrifying void of conflicting emotions. In the aftermath of the murder, Daniel fled the scene, his hands stained with Jennifer's blood. He returned home where Linda found him, trembling, incoherent. She realized immediately what he had done, and in a moment of twisted loyalty, born from fear and self-preservation, she decided to help him cover up the crime. The life they had built, the secrets they had kept, everything was at stake. Linda knew that if they were to survive this, they needed to act quickly and decisively. Linda, driven by a desperate, misguided loyalty and a fierce will to survive, took control. She led Daniel to the bathroom, instructing him to remove his clothes, to wash off the blood. Her mind raced, a chilling calm descending amidst the urgency. As Daniel stood under the hot shower, the water turning pink around his feet, Linda gathered his clothes, placed them in a plastic bag. She scrubbed the floor where he had walked, meticulously eliminating every trace of blood. Once Daniel was cleaned up, she sat him down, forcing him to recount every gruesome detail. Despite his emotional state, Daniel managed to provide a coherent account, his voice shaking with the weight of his actions. Linda devised a plan. They needed an alibi, and they needed to dispose of every shred of evidence linking them to the crime. She called a trusted friend, calmly claiming Daniel had been with her all evening, ensuring their alibi was backed up. Then, under the cloak of night, she drove to a secluded area outside of town. There she burned Daniel's bloodstained clothes and the murder weapon. praying the fire would consume every last piece of evidence. The police questioned everyone in the neighborhood, including the Garners. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel, though visibly distressed, managed to avoid raising suspicion. The investigation seemed to stall, with no concrete leads pointing to the Garners. They had gotten away with it for now. But the psychological toll of that night weighed heavily on both Daniel and Linda. Daniel became increasingly paranoid, convinced the police were closing in. He withdrew from friends, from colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Linda, outwardly composed, felt the crushing strain of their secret. She became hypervigilant, scrutinizing every interaction, every behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and deception. Linda took on the role of stabilizer, managing Daniel's paranoia while maintaining their public facade. She monitored the news for updates on the investigation, relieved that the police seemed to have no solid leads. But Linda knew that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed a narrative that would divert attention away from Daniel. She suggested he appear more distraught over Jennifer's death, to align with the community's grief, to throw off any suspicion. At social gatherings, at community meetings, Daniel played the part of the grieving friend. He spoke of Jennifer with a mix of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Mark, devastated, desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Daniel's empathy, never suspecting his friend's monstrous involvement in his wife's death. But Daniel's mental state continued to deteriorate. His guilt manifested in relentless nightmares, horrifying hallucinations. He started drinking heavily, seeking solace in alcohol, but finding only temporary escape. Linda, fearing he might confess in a drunken stupor, kept a close eye on him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house. One evening, as Daniel sat slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down. He confessed to Linda. He couldn't live with the guilt any longer. He needed to come clean. Linda panicked. She tried to calm him down, to help him maintain their composure. She suggested they take a short trip out of town. They traveled to a secluded cabin in the mountains. Hoping the change of scenery would help Daniel regain some semblance of peace, the isolation offered a temporary respite, allowing them to plan their next steps without the constant pressure of the investigation looming over them. During their time at the cabin, Linda reinforced the importance of their secrecy. She coached Daniel on how to handle police questioning, public interactions, drilling him until he could respond without hesitation. Linda's grim determination to protect their lifestyle, to avoid imprisonment, fueled her relentless drive to keep their story straight. Upon returning to Pine Hill, the Garners resumed their lives with a renewed, grim sense of purpose. Daniel, though still haunted by his actions, managed to present a more stable front. Linda continued to manage their interactions with the community, ensuring they remained above suspicion, but the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Daniel's increased drinking, his erratic behavior. Whispers of his possible involvement in Jennifer's death began to circulate. Linda, ever vigilant, worked to quash the rumors, but she knew their time was running out. As the police investigation continued, new evidence began to surface. Evidence pointing towards inconsistencies in Daniel's alibi. The Garners' carefully constructed world was teetering on the brink of collapse. The truth was closer to being revealed than ever before. Detective Mitchell, a sharp and intuitive investigator, interviewed the Garners separately, meticulously noting any discrepancies in their stories. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny. Daniel's emotional state seemed consistent with that of a grieving friend, but Mitchell's instincts screamed. There was more to the story. As the weeks passed, new evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of Jennifer's phone records revealed a series of increasingly desperate text messages from Daniel, indicating his chilling obsession with her. Mitchell brought Daniel in for further questioning, pressing him on the inconsistencies in his alibi, the true nature of his relationship with Jennifer. Daniel, struggling to maintain his composure, stuck to the story Linda had coached him on. But his nervousness, his evasive answers, only heightened the detective's suspicions. Then, the turning point. A neighbor came forward with crucial information. They had seen Daniel's car parked near the Johnsons' house on the night of the murder and remembered the strange behavior he had exhibited. This testimony, combined with the forensic evidence from Jennifer's phone and Daniel's erratic behavior, was enough. enough for the police to obtain a search warrant for the Garners' home. During the search, the police found it, remnants of burned clothing, and traces of blood that had seeped into the floorboards. Despite Linda's thorough, desperate cleaning, the damning evidence was there. This, coupled with the witness testimony and the phone records, painted a clear, undeniable picture of Daniel's guilt. The net was closing in on the Garners, and Linda finally realized their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. She knew their only chance of escaping a lengthy prison sentence was a new plan, one that would shift the blame away from them or at least soften the blow. As the police closed in, Linda and Daniel faced the harsh reality of their situation. The lies, the deceit that had once protected them, were now threatening to unravel completely. The truth was about to be revealed in a way they could never have anticipated. Detective Mitchell, with all the evidence gathered, prepared to make her move. She brought Daniel in for another round of questioning, this time with a different approach. She laid out all the evidence, the phone records, the witness testimonies, the forensic findings. Daniel, cornered, overwhelmed, finally began to crack under the relentless pressure. Mitchell pressed harder, suggesting that if Daniel came clean, he might receive a more lenient sentence. Daniel, unable to handle the crushing weight of his guilt and the relentless questioning, finally broke down. He confessed. He confessed to killing Jennifer. He described his obsession, the final confrontation, the moment he lost control. But in his confession, Daniel also implicated Linda, revealing her crucial role in covering up the crime. He described how she had helped him clean up, dispose of evidence, and meticulously craft their alibi. Mitchell, sensing the opportunity to get the full story, had Linda brought in for questioning as well. Confronted with Daniel's confession, Linda initially denied any involvement, but as Mitchell detailed the overwhelming evidence and Daniel's damning account, Linda realized there was no way out. Her carefully constructed lies had finally unraveled. She admitted to helping Daniel, explaining that she had done it out of a misguided sense of loyalty and the consuming fear of losing everything they had built. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner captivated Pine Hill and the surrounding region. The courtroom was packed with reporters, with curious onlookers, eager to see the tragic conclusion of this horrifying tale. Daniel, charged with first-degree murder, and Linda, charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice, both pleaded guilty to their respective charges. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda, despite her role in the cover-up, received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and her previously clean record. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. Mark Johnson, left to pick up the shattered pieces of his life, found some solace in the justice served, but he continued to mourn the incomprehensible loss of his beloved wife. So, what truly happened in Pine Hill? Was it a harmless experiment that spun out of control? Or was it a hidden darkness lurking just beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, waiting for an opportunity to consume everything? This story of obsession, betrayal, and murder reminds us that even in the quietest towns, the most ordinary people, secrets can fester, growing into monsters that destroy not just lives, but entire communities. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Linda was more a victim of circumstance or a willing accomplice? Let me know in the comments below. And if this chilling story gripped you, please like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more true crime stories no one talks about.